Awesome. Welcome, everyone. We would like to welcome everyone to the 2025 Southeast ACSM Fall Lecture Series. And so, first of all, we do have a couple of thank yous that we want to get out of the way for helping us make this possible. And so, a big thank you to Georgia State University, specifically the College of Education and Human Development and the Department of Kinesiology and Health. They have helped us to put this on today. And I also want to thank the Southeast ACSM executive team for allowing us to put this on and giving us the support that we need. And so to get us started today, we have a nice welcome from our president, Dr. Alicia Byrne.
Good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to welcome you to the 2025 Fall Lecture Tour of the Southeast American College of Sports Medicine. We are very glad to see so many of you here in person at Georgia State University, and we are equally glad to have many of you joining us online. So this year is an exciting milestone for us because it's the very first time that we are hosting this tour as a hybrid format. So if you think about it, the lecture tour has mirrored the way many of us have had to adapt in the previous years. We started with in-person gatherings, then shifted fully online, and now we are blending the best of both worlds. It's almost like completing a progressive training program. We began with one exercise, advanced to another, and now we're ready for the combined challenge. I want to extend a very sincere thank you to our hosts here at Georgia State University. Their generosity and hospitality made it possible for this event. Hosting a lecture tour is no small task, and we are grateful for the effort that has gone into making today a success. The Fall Lecture Tour has always been one of the highlights of our chapter. It provides an opportunity for students, faculty, clinicians, researchers, and practitioners to come together to share knowledge. Over the years, this tour has showcased leading voices in sports medicine and exercise science. We've heard talks that challenged our thinking, inspired our practice, and connected us more deeply to this field that we love. In 2021, when travel was not possible, the lecture tour still found a way to thrive in a virtual environment. In 2022, Dr. David Garcia spoke on obesity prevention and health disparities. In 2023, Dr. Gina Yentes delivered a memorable lecture titled Red Bull, Donuts, and Palm Trees that had us thinking about research products in new ways. And today, we continue that strong tradition as Dr. Rachelle Reed leads us in a conversation about recovery and technology. This is a timely topic that bridges research and application to industry in ways that matter to both professionals and the public. The Southeast chapter of ACSM is a vibrant community. We are a place where students and professionals can learn, network, and grow together. If you are not yet a member, I want to personally invite you to join us. Membership is affordable for students and professionals, and it opens the doors to conferences, networking events, research opportunities, and leadership development. You can find all the details on our website at southeast.acsm.org. Thank you once again for being here. Whether you braved Atlanta traffic this morning or you fought your Wi-Fi connection, you are part of a community that values science, practice, and collaboration. On behalf of the Southeast chapter of the American College of Sports Medicine, welcome to the Fall Lecture Tour. Enjoy today's lecture, engage with your colleagues, and take the opportunity to strengthen your connection to the work we all care so deeply about. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bryan. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Rachelle Reed. Dr. Rachelle Reed is not only the head of scientific research and science communication at Therabody, but she also holds a BA, an MS, and a PhD in exercise physiology. She has a passion for helping people develop healthy habits to improve both their quality of life and longevity that has driven her to many of her accomplishments and certifications, including having completed postdoctoral training in exercise physiology. Dr. Reed is also an American College of Sports Medicine certified exercise physiologist and chairs ACSM's continuing professional education committee. For the last 10 years, Rachel has worked as an industry scientist for Fortune 500 global brands, bridging the gap between wellness and research. And it is my pleasure to introduce her today for our talk. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you all so much thank you. And thank you so much for having me here. I have to say this is quite humbling because for so many years, I've been a member of the Southeast ACSM chapter and also of ACSM at large. And so having the opportunity to speak to all of you when I really am your peer and collaborator it's quite humbling. So thank you so much. As Jonathan mentioned, I've been working in the industry now for about 10 to 12 years with different companies, helping to establish a research agenda, make sure that products or experiences are backed by science, and also to communicate the science behind those products and experiences. And today's topic of recovery is quite timely because the ACSM fitness trends for 2026 were just released, and we see the recovery technology space continuing to climb, meaning that people who are boots on the ground, so fitness professionals, registered dietitians, clinicians who shared with us their perspective of what's trending in the industry are seeing recovery technology. We know that consumers are interested in this space. We know that there are a lot of companies in the industry who are vying for market shares and spend from consumers. And we know that there's a lot of really great researchers who might be tuning in too. And so being able to kind of paint this picture for you from my perspective of what I'm seeing will hopefully be helpful today. So here's what we'll cover. I'm going to talk a little bit about the recovery space overall and how I think about recovery based on wearing my exercise physiology hat and also being an industry scientist. Then I'll talk to you about the role of technology and how I think technology is really shaping a lot of consumer wellness trends. We'll also cover some of the trending recovery modalities, things like cold water immersion, heat therapy, LED therapy. We'll cover all of that. And then I want to transition a little bit to talk to you about product development and how the industry works as far as using science and research and collaboration with the academic space to make these products come to life. And then I'll share some insights into the future of recovery and how I think there's a big need for more collaboration between the industry and the academic space. So let's start with the recovery space overall. It is booming, and the recovery space is one small little piece of the greater wellness pie. We know that the wellness space is worth about $2 trillion right now, and it's growing 5 to 10% every year in just the US alone. So what that means is that there are a lot of companies coming to the table with different products and experiences for consumers. And I think this is closely related to this quest for longevity and health span that's sort of hitting the consumer market. Now, of course, we know as exercise scientists and clinicians, et cetera, that longevity has always been important. Quality of life has always been something that we measure and research, right? But just now consumers are paying closer attention, and we're seeing that reflected in this space. We also know that about 82% of US consumers consider wellness a top priority, which is great news for us because it means we have an engaged audience to hopefully participate in research and then also purchase products or invest time in things like physical activity and other habits that can improve their health. But when we look at the data, we also see some interesting trends with different generations. So Gen Zs and millennials are actually purchasing more and investing more spend in wellness and health than other age groups. And so that's really interesting from an industry perspective because that's who companies are going to market to, right? We know if they're spending more, we want to have marketing that resonates with them. But I want to share something that's pretty encouraging to me about this data about the wellness space in general is that when consumers are asked what they feel is the most important as far as helping them decide if they're going to purchase something or invest in a gym experience, they want efficacy. They want to be shown efficacy by the company. So that whatever product they're using or whatever workout they're participating in, whatever biohack trends that they're trying, that it has been shown to be effective in some way. They also, although it's a little smaller, so if you're looking at the graphic, like 27% of people do say it's important that the product is science-backed too. So some level of credibility is wanted, which is a really good thing. It's just up to us, I think, as leaders in this space to figure out how can we steer them toward proper information when there's so much misinformation out there. And so here's how I think about it. I think evidence creates credibility, credibility builds trust, and then trust drives that consumer engagement, okay? So consumers are very interested in this space overall. And as we talked about briefly, we know that the space is continuing to grow. So we're seeing recovery modalities, this idea of recovery pop up on all the wearable trackers. So whatever tracker you have, there's probably some measure, some algorithm that's trying to capture recovery of body battery, et cetera. We see it in boutique brands. We see it in the sports performance space. We even see it on universities and college campuses. Recovery is up there, and we see that reflected in the ACSM trends for this coming year too. Last year, it was number 20, and then this year it's hopped up a few spots. So pretty interesting to see, especially when we think about how that can be connected with some of the other items that are always at the top, like wearable technology, data-driven technology, right? So we're seeing this space change quite a bit pretty quickly. So what is recovery and how should we think about it? Now, every exercise physiology textbook might have a different definition. So I'll tell you how I've sort of interpreted the literature living in this space now for the past few years. If we look at all of the literature on recovery, think about it as this return to homeostasis or this return to a normal state or an improved state that prepares you to be able to perform again with whatever you're doing. Now, sometimes it's not possible to get to an improved state compared to baseline, but can you get back a little bit closer to that readiness level so that mentally or psychologically you're ready to go? We think about this at Therabody as psychological and also physical, okay? So when I'll share a little bit of the research that we've done on some different modalities with you all throughout the talk today. But when we're thinking about recovery, we really are thinking about it from this more holistic space. Like, yes, some physiological parameters that might show like physical readiness or recovery of tissue, recovery of performance on different tests, but we're also thinking about the psychological state and how important that can be for people when they're performing physical activity. And just to set the stage, this area matters for several different reasons. I've captured a couple up here. One is performance optimization. So again, this readiness. This is especially important for people who are competing in athletic competitions, right? It's also important for the everyday athlete. Someone like me who has 2 little kids and has a full-time job and is juggling all the things at one time, we still want to be able to pay attention to these physiological and psychological cues of readiness for different things. And it can also help with stress and fatigue management. So we know that if we're better managing our stress, maybe it's through the use of technology, the use of something like deep breathing, can be a number of things. Going for a walk to clear your mind. We know that managing stress is important, and also managing your feelings of fatigue is important. It can also impact injury prevention and decision-making during play, right? So if someone is in this sort of athletic training space, or they've got a high volume of training, maybe they're training for a marathon, for high rocks, which is really popular right now. We know that if they are not being smart about how their programming is set up, it might make them more likely to experience some type of injury or setback, physically or mentally, which can really interfere with their performance. And then, of course, resilience. So I'm sure you've all seen the cold plunge craze that's online. It's on all of the popular big health podcasts, being something that promotes resilience, and you can get better every time, you can adapt, and you have this like huge energy boost, right? And there is something to that when we look at the literature about being ready psychologically and being able to show up and take on the next challenge, whether that's physical or mental. When I think about recovery, though, I think about this visual of a recovery pyramid. where there's a certain foundation that's needed, and then the technology, okay, and I'm saying this like as objectively unbiased as possible. You know that I work for Therabody right now, but this is truly how I see it. If you don't have the table set well, and you only rely on fancy and trendy tools, it's sort of like putting lipstick on a pig, right? We want to make sure that we have everything else ready, and then perhaps we can optimize by using something that technology makes easier for us to access. So sleep is like hands down, when we look at the literature, something that's very important. A lot of you know so much about sleep. So just a quick reminder though, that using different techniques to improve your sleep quality, like improving your sleep hygiene, your sleep environment, can be really impactful here. Sometimes it's not possible to get 7 to 9 hours of sleep. So maybe if you can only get 6, you can work on optimizing the quality of that sleep instead, right? So that you're getting a good distribution of deep sleep and REM sleep throughout the night, which of course have different purposes for health and performance. The second one, the second little rung on the ladder there is nutrition and hydration. So of course, fueling and refueling appropriately is going to be key for anything performance and also for recovery from performance, okay? And so we want to make sure that that table is set very nicely for all types of people, athletes or everyday athletes. Training is next. So think about smart training, hopefully having some sort of program that's well-rounded. Maybe there's periodization used. Maybe there's modification based on how you're feeling, stress management or volume management overall. We know that in today's day and age, so few people actually get enough physical activity to even reach this point where they need to worry about periodization or a really smart schedule. Okay, but when we do get people that do reach that point where they're meeting those basic recommendations for physical activity to promote health, we hope that we can educate them with certified professionals, right, to really balance that out well and be smart about their approach. And then at the very tip top, you have this opportunity to optimize using different modalities, different therapies. I even think supplements fall into this category, where you're doing pretty well with everything underneath and you're looking for that edge, or you have a tool that's readily available to you and you need to know how and when to use that tool from a physiology point of view so it makes sense. So with that in mind, let's talk about the role of technology in the recovery space today. At Therabody, we think of recovery technology as enhancing what your body already does naturally. We all know that if you've done a really tough resistance training workout, you're going to be a little sore the next day, and then the next day after that, you're probably going to be pretty sore, especially if the load was heavier or the volume was higher than you're used to. But your body is going to recover. The body has built-in processes to recover, but we know from research that using certain modalities and technology can improve the speed of recovery, right? We know it can enhance what the body is already doing naturally. So we've got a couple of examples up here for you. One is showing a more direct benefit for recovery. So think about something like compression therapy, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that modality is. You've probably seen like the big, it almost looks like a giant pair of pants that you can pull on, and it's using sequential compression. So it starts at the feet, compresses there, goes up to the ankle, compresses there, goes up, to the calf, the mid-thigh, right? And this compression promotes better blood flow, circulation to that treatment area, okay? So localized increased blood flow, better circulation, that can lead to this feeling of having fresh legs faster. So if you are in the middle of training for something, we know from several studies now that using compression therapy after a long run can help you with that feeling, right? So that's a direct benefit. A second example, which is more indirect, is that something like a massage gun, so this percussive therapy, and again, we'll talk about this in a minute, using massage gun can help you feel relaxed. If you've used one before, or even if you've ever had a traditional massage before, you know that it sort of shifts you away from that sympathetic state into a parasympathetic state, and you feel more relaxed. Well, that can help you sleep better. It can help you sleep better that night, and some evidence suggests even the following night. And what that can do is, of course, improve health and hopefully your ability to push harder if you're performing in a workout, right? So when we think about recovery and how technology makes it possible to recover better, we think about this direct application of a certain therapy, so heat, compression, massage, light therapy, etc. to a physiological process to speed it up along the way. And I feel like as this space continues to shift, we're seeing more and more companies try to help consumers think about recovery as part of an exercise, part of a health plan overall, rather than seeing it as this thing that's like just on the side or like adjacent to performance or activity. More and more, we're seeing it be included in different metrics for wearables, right? We're seeing different products be Bluetooth connected so that your device can track how many minutes you're using it for, right? We're seeing this sort of like connectivity across physical products, software products, wearables, etc. And I think that that shift will continue. I feel like the future is this closed loop system that learns from your body to help you optimize performance. Now, we'll talk a little bit later about how I think about the need for research and validation of these different tools and how this closed loop system can actually work better. But I do think we're seeing that trend. And again, I believe that's reflected in the ACSM fitness trends for 2026 as well. Questions so far before we talk about some of the hot trendy modalities? Okay, amazing. So the first one is heat therapy. How many of you have tried a sauna or an infrared sauna before? Yes, perfect. Probably you've also used some kind of heating pad or like a hot water bottle pack, something like that, right? And so when we think about heat therapy, we really need to think about it in two buckets. One is localized heat therapy. The same categorization applies to cold too, where you're applying it locally to like a certain group of muscles, certain area of the body, or whole body heat therapy. Okay, and the mechanisms are similar, but one is very localized and one is systemic. Okay, so we have to think about that when we're interpreting what makes sense for what kind of person when with recovery. If we're thinking about using something like a sauna, we know that the way the body responds to the heat stress is actually quite similar to how the body responds to aerobic activity in many ways. Not all of them, don't get me wrong, but in many of them. So you have this increase in heart rate, an increase in systolic blood pressure from that increase in heart rate, an increase in cardiac output, an increase in sweat rate, of course, to try to keep your core body temperature controlled. And we see vasodilation of most of the blood vessels, especially peripherally, or if you're using localized to that area, right? We see this vasodilation, which can help promote blood flow and better delivery of oxygen and nutrients to certain tissues, right? So in the short term, if we're thinking about how that could be beneficial for somebody, the literature suggests that this increase in blood flow can promote nutrient and oxygen delivery. Also helps you kind of feel like relaxed. Like if you've ever gotten out of the sauna, you probably feel like just kind of relaxed, almost ready to go to bed. It can improve your sleep and it can reduce feelings of muscle soreness. Okay, so most of the literature on muscle soreness with something like heat or cold is perceptual data, right? So from validated questionnaires, but the feeling of feeling recovery and ready to go. However, there are some short-term detriments to keep in mind, especially if we're thinking about this from a performance lens. One of them is that it is an additional physiological load. So there are some recent papers that have come out where researchers have had a group of athletes or participants complete aerobic training and then get into a sauna right after their sessions to sort of extend the physiological load. And they might compare that total time exercise plus sauna to the same amount of time with exercise alone to see what the differential impacts are on different metrics related to aerobic fitness, right? And we do see in the literature that it does extend the physiological load, right? Your body's still working hard. It's not as if your body is resting there. So you need to take that into account, especially if you are maybe working with an athlete or working with a patient or client who is training for certain outcomes. We know that dehydration is a potential there, of course, because you're losing a decent amount of sweat volume there. And then it also takes time. So it can be time insensitive. I think when we're looking at any of these modalities in the wellness space overall, we have to think about what we all love most, which I venture to say is physical activity. We want people to be physically active. And in the case where someone can't be physically active or won't, could using a sauna in some ways give them some of those same benefits? Yeah, but I think we would all still rather them be physically active. So it can be time intensive. We have to think about that. And if someone's already not using what little time they have to be active, is this the best use of their time? Right? We have to be able to make these evidence-based decisions. And then some long-term benefits. So if we look at epidemiological data of people who use saunas all the time, so most of these longitudinal studies are actually in the Finnish culture. It's just part of their culture there to use hot and cold therapies. I feel like the Western world is like trying to catch up and embrace that a little bit. But when we look at data, it's important to note that most of this data is actually in men. Okay, so less data in women's, not a surprise, I'm just pointing it out. But what we see is that using sauna over the long term can be really helpful and protective for things like cardiovascular disease risk, Alzheimer's disease risk, and also some mental health diagnoses in men specifically. And once again, those, the magnitude of like the protective factor of using a sauna is not quite as high as what we see with physical activity and long-term adoption of it, but almost. And so it's really interesting to think about the mechanisms there. Okay, cold therapy. This one is, it's everywhere. Hopefully you've tried a cold plunge at some point, even if just to experience this for yourself. You want to think about it the same way that we categorize heat therapy. You could have localized cold therapy, like if one of my kids gets hurt, I'm probably going to grab an ice pack to like stop the pain signal from the skin and the muscle to the brain, distract them a little bit, and also reduce inflammation, right? If we are like immersing most of the body in cold, it's quite a different experience, as you can all probably relate to. So what happens to the body, of course, in the cold is we see this decrease in either core or tissue temperature. Vasoconstriction of a lot of the blood vessels to kind of keep the core warm, especially the peripheral blood vessels. But we see a response of the endocrine system and the cardiovascular system. If you've ever gotten into a cold plunge, you know at first it's like, whoa, like what is happening, and your heart rate is going to spike up. And then after about 30 seconds, you see it start to kind of come back down a little bit. So really interesting response to experience. When we look at the literature, we see some short-term benefits like increased alertness. I mean, yeah, like we've all felt that, a mood boost. It can reduce inflammation, so it can make you feel less sore. Reduced self-reported DOMS, okay, again, self-reported. It can decrease inflammation, swelling. It can help you be ready to return to play or exercise or work out or whatever you need to do, return from an injury faster. That said, there are some studies, and I know you've probably seen this on social media, some studies and a pretty well done meta-analysis of late, and I've linked that one on the slide if you'll get a copy of that, but that are showing that if you use cold therapy, whole body cold therapy specifically, after resistance training, by definition, it's going to blunt the inflammatory response that we know we need in order to adapt to the stress of the training. And so it can be counterproductive over the long term. And that's what we're kind of starting to see happen in the literature here. Now, there's some common sense ways around that. Like if you just love whole body cold therapy for other reasons, maybe it's the alertness factor, it's the mood boosting, you could use it on off days of resistance training, right? You could use it in a smart cadence there. And in some cases, like some studies are showing that if like you're doing a triathlon and you really are like, you're hurting after one part of that race, using something like cold therapy to quickly reduce pain and boost your energy, like, yeah, there's a good use case there. So again, when we're thinking about recovery, we just have to think about all of the physiological implications and how those modalities interact with the brain and the body. Okay, next is compression therapy. And again, think of this as like the big old like pant legs that you put on. You've probably seen them. That technology was actually introduced in a medical setting, and you've probably seen this, or maybe you've had surgery yourself. I know for me, I had 2 C-sections, and both of my kids were delivered that way. And after each one, they put compression devices on my feet and ankles, right, to help increase circulation as I was coming back from the spinal tap, right? Like, because if the lower body, it's hard for you to move, they need to be able to help reduce swelling, reduce the risk of clots, improve circulation. And so that device was actually created for that purpose, and since has trickled into athletic training and performance spaces to help improve circulation and help people kind of return to play more quickly. So we do see that that can change the blood flow. I mean, by design, it's sort of mimicking a pump action, right? It's designed to do that. It may also have some benefit for the lymphatic system, which I know is like trending right now for people to talk about. And so when we look in the literature, we do see short-term benefits, things like reducing inflammation, reducing feelings of soreness, helping improve performance readiness. One of our research partners globally actually just finished a study, I think it was just published, on handball players. And handball is actually, I have to look up. I was like, handball, what are the rules of that? What is it? I was like, what is the physiological load of handball? But their experimental design was a 5-week study where these handball players were having like 2-a-days, where they would like train in the morning and they would have practice in the evening. It was 5 days a week, so a pretty high volume of training. And they had half of the players use pneumatic compression after each session, and the other half didn't. They just did whatever they would normally do to recover. Maybe they went for a walk, did some like stretching, etc. And we actually did see improved performance and better delay to fatigue. So they were able to maintain performance better when they were using compression therapy after their sessions, which is pretty interesting. That was one of the first longer term studies looking at that. I know 5 weeks isn't long, but a lot of the studies in this space use it once and like, oh, did it change circulation right after? Yes, it did. And that is important to know. But what matters from a real world or ecological validity point of view is like, well, what's the benefit of using it long term? Like if someone's going to invest in this product, what can they expect long term? Because yeah, those acute benefits matter, but what matters more is the long game. So we see some long-term benefits as well. So decreasing fatigue during high training periods. It can be used under medical care for soft tissue and bone healing. It is providing pressure and load to the bone and the soft tissue. It is time intensive though. So most of the sessions or the studies looking at products like this, people are using that for an hour or so. So again, time intensive, and you have to be sedentary when you're using the product. Right? So you're seated or lying. Again, just things to think about. Vibration therapy. I know you've probably seen the whole body vibration plate craze that's going on right now. I see it everywhere from New York Times articles to all over my Instagram and TikTok feeds. And it's so interesting, right? Because whole body vibration therapy, when you look at the literature, a lot of the studies are looking at using it as a way to prevent osteoporosis or strengthen bones in older women specifically, right? Which we do need that in older women. But now we're seeing positive findings from those studies sort of like misapplied or conflated with like, let's mix up our workout by adding this in and let's strength train while we're on the vibration plate. And so when you actually look at the literature, you see the evidence kind of heavy in this one space and like way less so with whole body vibration and other outcomes. So vibration can be applied, yeah, whole body. If you're sitting on a vibration plate, we're sitting on one. More common than now, we're seeing localized vibration devices. So like the massage gun is using vibration and percussion. We'll talk about that. Percussion is vibration plus force applied to an area, okay? And we do see some short-term changes locally when we're using something like that. So vasodilation of the blood vessels in that area. It can promote relaxation. It can improve neuromuscular control. Vibration is used a lot in patients who need improved neuromuscular control. So people with certain types of conditions or injuries can benefit a lot from that. We don't really see in the literature any detriments. Again, it's just like, does someone like that sensation or not? And then we do see, again, some long-term benefits in physical therapy settings when we're thinking about recovering post-injury or helping somebody improve bone health. Closely related to vibration therapy is percussive therapy. So again, that's vibration, so oscillating plus a force applied to that. And this is the type of therapy that the Theragun, which I think is how Therabody sort of came onto the consumer map. This is how the Theragun came into play. So we know the physiological response overlaps quite a bit there with what we see in vibration therapy. We've done quite a few studies on the Theragun specifically. I think we have 16 peer-reviewed studies now that our research partners all over the world have published. And when we look at those findings, one that really sticks out to me is the pain relief aspect of it. It can disrupt some of the pain signaling pathways and help somebody improve their mobility enough to where they're physically active a little bit more, which we know is what we need for pain to decrease long term. I'll share with you, we have a really cool study ongoing right now at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, on older women. And we know that like 7 in 10 older women experience some kind of musculoskeletal pain that makes it tough for them to stay physically active. And so in working with their research team, we were able to say, okay, we know we have this like product that could help modulate pain. And what if we modulated pain, we could just measure how their physical activity changed objectively when they use this. And the study will finish up, I think, in early November. We'll finish with data collection. But so far, we're seeing a slight uptick in physical activity levels, which is awesome. So we think about, we can think about recovery in a sports performance sense, but it matters so much for the everyday person too. And maybe we think about almost like rebranding recovery. Like if we can help relieve somebody's pain so that they're able to go for a walk or park farther away or live independently longer without medication, like it's a win. Okay, now we've talked a lot about modalities and some of the trending topics that are out there today. I wanted to give you like a look inside how the industry works as far as applying the science of these modalities into products. Because I think this is something that I wish I knew when I was in your seat. I knew I wanted to work in the industry. It just felt so elusive to me. I didn't know what skills I needed to sharpen, which ones would carry over. And I had very little understanding of almost like the word, like the language of business and the language of product development. So giving you like a sneak peek, I think could be really helpful here. Again, knowing that like science is so important, but understanding how to apply science in the industry will be really helpful. Even if you have no intention of ever working in this space, maybe you want to partner with an industry company for research, or maybe you're a consumer and you want to understand like what's going on behind the scenes at all these companies that are pushing products out on Black Friday. Okay, so when we think about how are you, everybody has some new products, by the way. But how are we thinking about product development? And like, where does the input of science happen? I think science plays a really interesting role because it does inform strategy, but the strategy shapes how and when science can be applied. So the purpose of science in industry is like really different than the purpose of science in academia. There's a lot of good overlap and there can be great synergy, but the driving forces are different. And this is something that I feel like I've lived the past decade or so. So for instance, in the academic sense, the true academic sense of research, we have research in most labs or PIs will have a research agenda generally. And they'll start doing work in one area and then results from one study will trickle into like, oh my gosh, well we could also anticipate it this way. And that's what I lived in and experienced in grad school. And I loved it because it allows the lab to develop this like really clear understanding of mechanisms or interventions in a specific setting or specific niche, okay? And so the purpose of research, and I'll be curious to hear if you all agree or if you're like, what is she talking about? Here is like discovery of new knowledge. And that's actually a requirement in a PhD. If you're going all the way through school, you need to be able to show, like, I understand this and I'm approaching something in a novel way. And in industry, the purpose of research is to validate a product and provide marketing claims. Okay, and so hopefully, I know it doesn't sound as cool as I think it is, but hopefully you can also use the foundation of science and the understanding of research that you have from your academic experience and infuse that in. So there's a way to accomplish the business agenda while also learning something new and contributing to a field. You just have to be strategic about that. And so when we're thinking about product development, there's a lot of inputs aside from science, like the competitive landscape. So what are other companies doing? What do we think we have the technological capabilities to beat based on what's out there? How fast can we do this? We've got to balance rigor with speed. That's another big difference I've noticed working in the industry. We might need a university partner to finish a study on 150 people in 4 months. That's a lot to ask. It's going to be expensive. That's fine. The company can afford that, right? So we have to figure out like what's the balance of speed with rigor and timely execution. Also regulatory complexity. So in the competitive marketplace, certain products are medical devices and different countries have different regulatory requirements. So working at a company like Therabody, I've needed to learn, okay, well, what does the FDA say about medical devices in the US? And how does that differ from Australia? And how does that differ from Canada? And how can we make sure the clinical trial we're running can satisfy all of those inputs? And then how long is that going to take to get all those agencies the data they need in order to approve certain claims on the product? Consumer insights. So like, what does the consumer want? What do they understand? Where are they shopping? Like what retailer partners can we sell this product at? Marketing and storytelling is a big one. That's where the science communication piece comes into play. So for instance, when we finished our study with the University of Michigan on pain and the Theragun Mini, we're going to have to do quite a bit of work to figure out how do we get that into a storytelling opportunity through commercials, even through like the packaging on the box. How does science show up in all those places? Yeah, and then the bottom line is ensuring that scientific investment aligns with the commercial potential. So when I think about the product life cycle, I think about it in 5 different steps. And some of these very much overlap with the scientific method of how you're thinking about science in the academic setting, but maybe with like a slightly different lens. So the first part is discovery. So this is where you would be doing, as a scientist working in industry, you might be generating hypotheses based on existing literature, looking at market research, talking with the marketing team or the marketing agency about what your competitors are doing. And then if a prototype of a certain product is ready to go, like say we have this like crazy idea to add something else to the compression boots. Like, what else could we add? Should we add cold? Should we add heat? Like what would make sense based on the technological capabilities? Then we would need to test that. We need to do validation studies at a small scale. So most industry companies have a small exercise physiology lab at their headquarters where they can test for certain measures. And then you get into this development cycle where you'd be working with engineers to give them feedback based on the data. And then they need to actually change the physical product. They give it back to you. You test it again. They give it back. You test it again, right? And on it goes until a product is almost final enough for you to run a clinical trial and substantiate the claims that the business might want to make. So the business might say, we're really interested in solving this problem of pain in older women. What can we do with this product? And then using a scientific skill set, you would maybe work to partner with the university, bring the study in, support the university, but let them independently collect the data and analyze it. Right? You gotta stay hands off, be very unbiased, but make sure they have all the support that they need. And then once the data are ready, you would brief in the marketing team and help the whole engine run off the back end of science. So that's where that scientific communication comes into play. And I think this is really important to understand, this product development cycle. You'll see this sitting within research and development teams across all different areas of the industry. So everything from supplement companies, and like there are a lot of them now. I think, have you guys heard of Grooms, the gummies? They're like these little tiny green packages. They're doing an awesome job with their marketing efforts. they are building a research and development team with several scientist roles right now. They're doing a really good job setting up this pipeline of like, science is going to be important throughout the whole pipeline, and there are different roles for people who are scientists with different skill sets. So say you love working in a lab setting, there are lots of companies in the supplement space and the recovery space that Therabody's in other medical device spaces, even in companies like PepsiCo. There are lots of companies out there that have this R&D pipeline, which can be really interesting for you to kind of look at if you're ever wanting to go down that road. And within each stage, there are different skills that a scientist can lean on, or someone who's being trained in science can lean on to help drive the business forward. So for example, in that early discovery phase where you're kind of understanding the mechanisms of action, and you need to really be able to read the literature, synthesize that information, and critically think about how that can apply to a physical product. You're using hypothesis design, you're using communication skills, you're writing, you're going into the literature. Those skills, weird fact about me, I've always loved literature reviews. I don't know what that says, take it for what it's worth. But that skill has been so integral to my everyday job for the past 10 to 12 years. Validation is a whole different bucket. Maybe you love designing and running pilot studies. So think 10 to 15 people getting into the lab, testing something specific, iterating on it, testing it again. Maybe you love that. Well, there's lots of companies who need that skill set. Perhaps you love running clinical trials and coordinating them and all the moving pieces and making sure everything's running as it should on schedule to get all the right people involved. There's a need for that in the industry as well. And then beyond the product development, now it's time to launch the product. That's where scientific communication, and if you love marketing, if you love the idea of sort of being in the media and giving insights to different people about science and teaching the everyday person about science, there's a big demand for that as well. And I think what's central to all of this is the need to balance evidence and execution of research in the industry. And so again, it's this idea that as the wellness space is expanding so fast, and even this recovery lane that Therabody lives in, it's so competitive. We have a couple of big competitors. You've probably heard of them. Hyperice, Shark is another one. Okay, there are so many big competitors out there, and it's like, oh, we're gonna launch a product. One of them's gonna launch something that's a little bit better, and then we'll keep going. And when we're thinking about that race for the consumer spend and improvement of health, we have to think about this balance between scientific rigor and commercial velocity to innovate responsibly. And that's where I think all of us using our scientific skill set can really be a huge advantage, whether that's through partnership with a company or even considering working within an industry company too. This leads me just to talk to you a little bit about how we think about product design at Therabody. We always start with the scientific evidence, so literally going into the literature, understanding what's out there, and also what questions we don't know the answers to yet. We also are looking at the consumer needs. We're thinking about how can we solve a problem for the consumer to improve health. Our goal as a company is to improve health and improve people's ability to move better. And so what kind of products can help somebody do that? We also need to look at technology. What can our engineers reasonably create that's reliable, that we can validate, that is accessible, that's affordable with tariffs? There's a lot of things in that bucket, okay? And then we need to rely on clinical experience and practitioner help. So we have a scientific advisory board. Somebody on that board is a physical therapist. We have a board certified dermatologist. We have, we have a medical doctor. We have people represented from complementary disciplines so that we can rely on their clinical experience to inform the decisions we're making as well. And then once we got that whole puzzle, we're going to validate it in scientific study. And that's how we're able to stay competitive and stay very true to the ethics of science and make sure that although we are in this space where the goal is to make the company a household name so everyone has one of the products, we're doing it in a way that we know can improve health outcomes because of the research that we've invested in with our partners. So I want to give you a quick example. One of our newest products is the Theragun Mini Plus. It's tiny, it's handheld, it delivers percussive therapy. So again, this is like local vibration plus pressure. And we had several peer-reviewed publications come out on the Theragun over the past 5 to 6 years. I think we're at like 16 or 17 now. But what we were seeing in the literature is that what we're seeing in the literature is that we know if you add heat to that, you could use the product for less time for similar benefits. And we know that consumers want something that doesn't take a lot of time, portable, they can fit in their bag. And so thinking about all of those inputs together, we came up with this idea, well, if our engineers can figure out how to get heat in this tiny compact product, which is, from what they have said, a really challenging thing because the product is small, but it needs to have all the technology inside of it to generate heat and sustain a safe temperature the whole time it's being used. It's kind of an engineering puzzle. We were able to do it, and this product represents a lot of different inputs from business key stakeholders to engineers to science. And now, let's see, just to show you kind of what happens in each of the 5 different steps there, we knew we had this knowledge of if we can combine heat therapy with a small product, we can make it more efficient. Okay, we needed to do validation work there. Then we needed to go back and forth with engineers to make sure we did safety testing on the product when it was unloaded, meaning like when it's just on and running without being applied to a person, and when it was loaded. Because we have to make sure for any of these products that we're submitting appropriate data to regulatory bodies to show like, hey, yeah, this is the temperature setting and this is how hot the surface temperature gets in the muscle tissue underneath. It's safe, it's safe, it's safe. We have to have data to support that, and that's what our science and engineering team does. Then for preparing for launch, we wanted to have some data to talk about from a marketing effort. We were able to work with a partner to collect that data, and then we're working with marketing now to support the launch of the product. And so I think, again, just thinking about how cool it is to have science infused in all pieces of that product development, it can be really empowering. And it's something to pay attention to even as a consumer, or even as you're working, maybe you're working with clients or patients, or you're a personal trainer or a group exercise instructor, and someone's asking you for recommendations or help with something really specific, or they heard about this product, what do you know about it? Making sure that when you are recommending a product or even looking to buy one for your mother-in-law or for yourself or what have you, that you're doing that from a company that is checking all of these boxes. Not every company is investing in the scientific process in that way, but I think they should be. Okay, so putting all of this together, I want to talk to you a little bit about the future of recovery. One of the really interesting things about technology and how it has evolved so fast over the past 5 to 6 years is that tech that was once really only available in a clinical setting or actual physical therapists, even things like TENS therapy, those are like widely available now. You can go on Amazon, you can order one, right? Just make sure it's been FDA cleared and tested, like be careful with all of that, right? But now we're seeing that recovery is available to the consumer. And so it's really blurring this line between the clinic and the practitioner and at-home use. And that can feel a little bit scary, I think, to a lot of us who really firmly stand in this space of like, we want to be able to educate the consumer. We want to make sure they're doing something that's evidence-based. And this is where I feel like this partnership between industry and academia is so needed, because companies can innovate fast, and it's hard oftentimes for the science to keep up with that innovation, okay? But if the two work together, then the science can keep up with the innovation, and the innovation can be responsible and credible so that people who are purchasing these products for at-home use can have confidence that science has been integral through each piece. As we're seeing wearables continue to climb, it's been #1 on the ACSM trends for, I think, at least the past 5 years. I expect it will hold that spot. We're seeing wearables continue to grow and change. saw a really cool one. It's actually an earring. You guys seen that one? So we're seeing them. It's so cool. I think the company is called Incora. It's really interesting, like how I think the founder is an environmental engineer. Just interesting to think about temperature measurement. It's a women's health specific product. But anyway, we're seeing this wearable space continue to like explode. And because there's so much data available everywhere, we see so much need for roles that have a lot of savviness for like mathematical modeling and huge language learning models, et cetera. And we see companies kind of leaning on that expertise a lot to make sense of all of these data. One thing that I feel is really missing is this partnership between industry companies that are creating these products and researchers who can help them validate the algorithms that they're generating from these large models. We know that if there is somebody who's, for instance, an exercise physiologist informing the design of the algorithm, it's likely that they're taking into account all the things that we would all think they should take into account, right? But if they're bypassing that step, it can lead to a place where maybe there's not as much validation as we hope there is. And I think we see that reflected in the literature that has been done. I know there are several labs even in the Southeast looking at this problem, but I feel firmly that we need more. We've got to figure out how to speed that up as well. I think this graphic is really interesting. This is from a friend of mine, Peter Tierney. He does awesome visuals. If you don't follow him on LinkedIn, I would consider it. He is also an exercise physiologist, used to lead research at Lululemon, and has a really interesting way of thinking about problems in the space. And this wearable decision tree, I thought just captured kind of some of the discrepancies we see so well, right? Where if you have a wearable, it probably has some kind of recovery metric or readiness score or body battery, and it's taking into account certain objective endpoints that it may or may not be validated sooner. And then it's making some kind of cumulative score. And then it's like, oh my gosh, this is telling me, I mean, this morning my watch was right, I was sitting in traffic on the way here, and it was like, your body battery score has decreased 6 points in like a stressful period. I'm like, that tracks, okay? But then there are other times where I'm looking at my score and I'm like, wow, it's telling me I shouldn't exercise today, but I feel great, right? And so we know that there's still this discrepancy and this need for more validation, and also I think a lot of exercise psychology expertise and behavior change expertise that certain companies could benefit from. Okay, so I think as things change in this space, research will be central to business success for three main reasons. One, regulatory and compliance landscapes. These landscapes are always changing. For instance, about 3 years ago, the FTC sort of changed their standards for the size of studies that are needed in order to make certain claims. And instead of relying on effect sizes and powering studies based on what we can expect, which, you know, in exercise science, we can usually measure things with a relatively small sample and have confidence in the data, they have this sort of like magic number of 100 or more people. Even if we know we could do 50 people and do a really good job, we need to keep our finger on the pulse there, and we have to make sure we're adapting in the industry to meet those different changes as well. Product development and innovation hinges on the scientific process. We need to make sure that science stays crucial to that. And this is where I think quite a few industry and academic partnerships can be really helpful. And then, of course, consumer trust and brand credibility. We're seeing more and more brands have scientific advisors or scientific partners who are speaking on behalf of their products, who have knowledge of physiology and health that can communicate to the consumer what the product does in a very authentic and credible way. And this will, I think, lead us to this integrated, connected ecosystem in the future, where the most trusted brands will be those that connect product, data, and people through science-backed systems. So I think about this as needing that human expertise. I don't think AI will ever be able to replace the knowledge of that we all have and that we bring to the table, that personal element, that behavior change element that's really important to helping people adapt behavior or continue it over time. We also know that physical products will only continue to grow. The amount of those wearables will continue to change as well. And I think we'll see these different areas continue to converge so that if you are, for example, using your Theragun, your wearable knows that and can objectively quantify the amount of time and measure changes in different outcomes, right? And so I think we'll continue to see this. And I just believe firmly that scientists and this ability for industry and academic scientists to work together to drive this space is more important now than it ever has been. And so with that, we can take questions, I think, right? Please.
So I'm interested to learn more about scientific roles within the industry organization that you were mentioning along that pipeline. You know, obviously, I think you have, okay, what are my skill sets? Where would I fit if I were an industry professional? I think I would fit based on my skill sets in the validation phase best. And so for a scientist that's employed in the industry in that space, is the role similar? Do they still submit their findings for peer review publication, or is that kind of frowned upon, you know, because they're paid by the company? Right? So like, what does that look like?
Okay, this is such a hot topic, and thank you for asking this question, because even when industry companies sponsor research, right? Like we're working with GSU and Georgia Highlands College right now on a study, and they received that funding through a research grant submission, and we thought the idea was awesome and ethical and valid and would be awesome for our marketing team. Even in that process, sometimes peer-reviewed journals will frown upon the fact that it's been, funded by an industry partner. But I think in the landscape today, with funding being so difficult for folks to secure, and then also industry companies needing partnership and having funding available, I feel like it's really interesting to think about where the ethical line is there. To your point though, yes, in the validation space, we do have scientists who are submitting results for publication. In fact, we're working on one right now. It's a really interesting, we had one of our research partners collect data and they just didn't have the bandwidth to do the publication. So we're working with them on it, and it's one that's a halftime intervention in soccer. And we're working on getting that ready to submit right now. And we'll disclose appropriately, this was funded by Therabody. This author and this author worked at Therabody. Like we will disclose all the appropriate things, and we'll have to see what the journal and what the peer reviewers say. But I do see this being more and more common as the industry changes and as funding becomes so tough to get with government. Yeah.
And I'll follow up with that question because it is about funding and it's so timely. How would an individual or a researcher identify or search for industry partners that would offer funding?
So industry partners, so it's two ways. A lot of industry companies now will have calls for research grants, and typically those calls will be based on like a marketing or a business strategy. So like looking for expertise in this really specific area, or submit your ideas in this area. We want to hear from you, what makes sense. You could have a specific call, and a lot of times you'll see those advertised. We advertised ours through SEACSM because we knew a lot of awesome researchers were connected with SEACSM, and we're really happy with where that landed. Another way to do this, and I love having these conversations. So if you feel like you fall in this bucket and you want to reach out, like please shoot me an email. But the other way is to reach out via email, via LinkedIn, and see what's possible. What is that company currently working on? There have been so many researchers who reached out to us, and maybe we don't have $50,000 to give them for a study, but perhaps we do have $4,000, and we can help fund a grad student's master's thesis with product and a little bit funding to help them go travel somewhere and present at Southeast ACSM their results, for instance. And so I think just like any partnership, if you can sort of get your foot in the door through reaching out to these different companies, and I would reach out to their science team, their research team directly, they'll really value that communication. If you can start small, like chances are, once then the company understands your capabilities as a research lab, your research agenda, when they have a need that falls in that area, you'll be the first one that they call back.
Another question, just because I know a lot of students may be watching this, if they're wanting to go into industry, the labeling of some of those jobs is not always consistent. So what would be something that maybe students could look for if they're wanting to go into industry that would be
Yes.
related jobs?
Okay, I have two thoughts on this. One is if you know of any industry scientists that you think they have cool jobs, go back and look at their LinkedIn profile and see what those job titles have been. Some, to your point, are really straightforward, like science, like a research scientist. Like, okay, you could search for that. But then some are a little bit more ambiguous, where you might have like scientific affairs, and it's like, what does that mean? Scientific affairs is a really interesting job title. So the first step would be to find people that have these roles, and again, look at what they've done before and what those roles are called. And then, using LinkedIn or using Indeed or even Google, you can set alerts for different job titles. I find that to be a really helpful strategy. It is harder, I think, to look for industry jobs than it is to look for jobs in the academic setting, because those tend to have the same few job titles at different places, right? So yeah, that's one of my biggest tips. And then the other one, think about using R and D, R plus D, R&D jobs, okay, scientific affairs, research science, clinical science. Okay, so there are a number of like sort of category headers that can be really interesting there too. Cool.
Perfect. Well, thank you everyone who came in person. Thank you, Dr. Reed, so much. And thank you for everyone who attended online to our fall lecture series. And so hopefully we'll get to see everyone at the next one or at Southeast ACSM coming up in February. And reach out to us if you have any questions, and we'll provide the slide deck in some form or fashion to all of our members. Thank you.
Thank you.